Morning everybody, it's Nick, as you can see, and I wanted to talk obviously more about the menopause today. So one of the things that occurs to me is I think as a society, I wonder if we're in danger of viewing the menopause a little bit too one-dimensionally. So there is clearly something very biological that goes on with us during the menopause, borne out by certainly my frequent blood tests and symptoms and medical interventions that make the quality of life for me far better than it would be without it. But I think that is one dimension, one facet of the menopause, and I don't think it is enough on its own, which is why I think it is a nuanced and a sophisticated thing that we need to embrace holistically. So I think for me, there's also a lot of mental and emotional stuff that goes on around the menopause, as well as the environmental stuff, if you like. And I was thinking this morning, so what are the things that I struggle with that really trigger me, that I've noticed are really amplified? They're either amplified during this phase for me in the menopause, or they didn't exist before, or I wasn't aware that they existed before, so they've triggered me in a different way. And I thought it might be helpful to share it, because if they're triggering and affecting me, maybe they are others. And I just wonder whether there's a bit of a holistic approach we could take. And it's, for me, it's all trial and error. I am constant trial and error, and every day is a new day. Every day is a new day, and that's how I look at it. So, and I've written a list, because otherwise I'll have a menopausal moment and I'll forget. So what are the top things that really create anxiety? And you might say that actually some of this is just normal, it's not to do with the menopause. And I think, the lines are very blurred. Yeah, the lines are very blurred. Some of it is the menopause comes in our middle age, which by definition means we have more responsibility. If we're going to be parents, we'll be parents. If we're going to be caring for older our parents who are older and so forth, that's the stage at which it's going to happen, right? So my top one is parenting. And I know one of the things to say, is try and remember what it was like for you as a teenager, and find some way to connect and talk to our teenagers. And we talk about, well, things are different nowadays, and I'm not sure I buy into all of that. Yes, a lot of the superficial things are different, but things are always different for every generation, because time moves on and we change, right? But we're still human beings. That's the common denominator. Getting off track a little bit, but one of the big things that really I find really difficult sometimes, particularly parenting teenagers, and I'm stumbling around in the dark and I haven't got a fucking clue what I'm doing half the time. And I think that does then, I think it's all linked, because I think one of the things, my next thing alongside on my list, is what else triggers me and causes me to get upset. Are situations where I might perceive that I'm rejected or not wanted or not part of the tribe. And again, there's a lot that goes on in this world all of the time for all of us. And very often, if somebody doesn't get back to us, or if something doesn't quite happen as it's meant to, or, we've reached out with work or in person and we haven't got a response and stuff like this, it's really, really, really easily for me to fall into the trap of feeling rejected, and it's because there's something wrong with me, or I'm not wanted there, or whatever. And the reality is, I think the trick is I have to remind myself to detach a bit, because lots of things are going on for lots of people, and very often it's nothing to do with me as to why somebody hasn't got back to me or something hasn't worked out. It's because there's lots of other stuff going on that I just don't know about, in the same way that lots of things go on with me that people just don't know about, and they might not know why. I've been, they've had radio silence from me for a few days. Maybe it's because actually there's so much noise that goes on in the outside world, things get so busy that sometimes it's just I just need to withdraw from it, because I get really, really, really overloaded. And so managing this feeling of, oh, am I being rejected? Am I not wanted? Am I not part of the gang? Am I not part of that tribe? Is something I think that's really been amplified during the menopause. And I think that links to my next point, looking down at my list, which is that feeling of, am I of value? Am I useful? Do I still have a purpose in this world? Now that, in a way, was much easier when I was in my 20s and 30s and certainly early 40s. because I was on my way somewhere. You know, I was building a career, so that felt really purposeful. You know, I was getting married, I was building a relationship, I was, you know, getting pregnant. I was pregnant for a long time with 3 young children. Well, not a long time, it's obviously 3 times 9, right? But anyway, that's 9 months each child, apart from my middle one who decided to do 9.5 months. Anyway, but I think in a way, a lot of that stuff is provided externally. You know, that the purpose and your place in the world is it's just naturally provided for you. Or you know, I had the motivation and energy to generate it. And I think that's really fundamentally shifted in my middle age, because I'm no longer in a career. We're not, of course I'm in a career, actually I say that, yes, you know, I'm a soul midwife, right? So I'm really committed to supporting people at end of life, but I do that purely on a voluntary basis, because I'm blessed enough to be able to do that, and I want to be able to do that. And it does feel different to in the early days when I was building a career. It was very much, I didn't have time to really think about why I was doing it or any of the rest of it. It was, you know, you were carving out your place in the world. You know, you got bills to pay. You were just starting out. So there's something quite different in middle aged around getting our heads around, or certainly my head around, my value and my purpose and my place. And I'm not sure society lends itself terribly well to the acceptance of middle-aged women. You know, I'm not the, you know, young sexy woman tottering around. I used to always totter around in my heels, honestly, even when I was, you know, in my late pregnancies with my first son. I still wore high heels. Now I struggle to wear them and I really miss it. Very superficial, but as an aside. So there's definitely something in there around self-worth, value, self-esteem, purpose and place in the world. And I think all of that gets interlinked. I know that I get really worried about what might happen. And, you know, I can get into this almost vortex of anxiety. So so I'll give you one example. So we've been flooded 3 times in our cottage. It's on different levels and one's on a lower level. We have put stuff in place to avoid that. But, you know, the heavy rains over the last couple of days, I really, 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 really hate heavy rains and storms, because I'm constantly keeping my eye on the pumps and making sure we're not going to get flooded again. And that anxiety is very, very real. And you might say, actually, that's reasonable because I've been flooded before. But then there's lots of other things that maybe aren't so reasonable. And I really, really have to stop myself from getting into this vortex of anxiety. It's almost, in a really perverse way, it can almost be addictive sometimes. And one of the things I remind myself of is just that surrendering and just having faith that, you know, life is really random. We don't really control anything. And I can spend all day worrying about the ifs and buts, but I've got no idea what's coming. So the only thing I can control is to, I guess, think of myself like the bird who perches on the branch, doesn't worry about the branch breaking, because they have absolute faith in their ability to fly. So it doesn't matter to them whether the branch breaks or not, because they'll just fly if it does. And I think that's a really good metaphor for saying, actually, you know, there is a randomness to life, and all we can ever really do is just learn to have faith in ourselves, that whatever is thrown our way we will deal with. In the same way, when I'm getting stressed about, you know, rejection or not being of value or not having a purpose or not being in the tribe, or is there something about me people don't like that I'm missing out on, and I'm not being self-aware of, is to try and almost step back and just detach myself and say, you know, most of the time it's nothing to do with me. It's nothing to do with me, because everybody else is probably also having these thoughts, and everybody else is also, you know, fighting their own battles. And there's also, and if we can work off the principle that, you know, people are fundamentally good and all doing the best that they can, they're probably just dealing with other stuff. But that is something that I have to really pull myself up on, and it's not easy. It is not easy, and it's definitely, all of that stuff is amplified, definitely amplified, I guess, apart from parenting, because I hadn't been a parent before. Maybe that's just simply, it's first time out, and it's hard because I don't really know what I'm doing. And actually I won't know whether I've cracked it or not until I look back, and then it'll be too late to do anything about it. Anyway, moving on. Other things, I do actually get quite worried about my energy levels. So one of the things that I find is when I'm asked to do stuff, or to, you know, if I was asked to say, do things there might be 2 or 3 long days in a row. That would actually worry me, because I know that it would really affect my energy levels. I know that I need to, if I'm committing to one long day, I probably need to make sure that the next day is a little bit more measured. So that is something, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a good thing, because maybe we have forgotten. Maybe we've got so used to working at such a fast rate. Maybe that is just not our natural state. And maybe one of the things the menopause does, and I have to remind myself of this, is bring us back and say, well, it's not that you're being lazy or not, the narrative of you're not able to do as much. Maybe it's just that it's just not natural to do that much. So there is something around that. And the other thing that I wrote down that really bothers me is sensory overload. So if there was a lot of noise, if there was a lot of busyness, if there was a lot of stuff going around me, particularly for a prolonged period of time, I really, both physically and mentally, really get the anxiety is very palpable. It's very physical. It's like different. It's like not a mental anxiety. It's almost physical. I can almost feel it kind of tensing up my body, and I just can't bear it. Went to this bongo bingo night the other week with my friends and sisters, and it was like a rave. Honestly, it was like bingo on acid. It was really loud. It was really full on. Now, in my younger years, I would have loved something like that. I was forever in a nightclub or going out or doing stuff. And honestly, after about an hour and a half, 2 hours, I actually had to leave, because I just could not cope with the level of noise and interaction. I really struggled. It was a very acute physical response I had to it. So they're the things that I wanted to share. And I think that there's a real mixture in there, because I think a lot of stuff around purpose and self-esteem and feeling of value, and that grounded foundational confidence in itself. I think a lot of what happens in the menopause is past stuff can get triggered. So the stuff that comes up into my memory banks, or feeling that will come up that I'd forgotten about, and maybe it's just that, my 20s, 30s, early 40s, I was so busy building a life, having a career, I just didn't have. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe I'm coming to some kind of conclusion here. I just didn't have time to really, sit and think about these things, or allow them to have space in my life. And maybe because the menopause in its own way has actually made me slow down, because physically I just get so tired. I just get so bone tired. If I just couldn't do the 10 or 12-hour days anymore. I just couldn't. And maybe that has created the space for things to bubble up. And maybe, there are some feelings of discomfort that it's right to bubble up and to sit with and to try and resolve and to heal and put them to bed once and for all. I'm not sure. I think the point of this vlog is just to share some of the things that I know that I can struggle with. And I think I've observed with a lot of people I know, I'm not on my own there. I think we all have a lot of inner vulnerabilities that we struggle with. And I'm not sure we live in a world where it's okay to talk, where we feel psychologically safe to talk about that. I think the menopause is an amplification. So the biological and the medical support, which is not okay for everybody, which is something, we do need to get much better at as a society, so it's available to all. That's one facet, that's one dimension. But I think there's a whole other dimension, a much more holistic approach around the environment that we're in, the pace at which we're living our life, the amount of stuff that we're hit with and we need to deal with. I think there's a whole conversation around that. And I also think there's a whole conversation around our emotional well-being and the emotional support we need. And I'm a big advocate of part of the menopause journey for me isn't just the medical, but also the therapeutic intervention. Support. I think support's a better word, because I do think it stirs up an awful lot of stuff that in a perfect world we would, I would have perhaps been able to deal with when it happened. But in my generation back in the 80s, no, it was a different world in terms of accessing mental health support then. It really was. So I really hope that's of help, because I guess it's saying for anybody who has, their vulnerabilities and their struggles, they will be different. They will be unique to each of us, but we all have them in our own ways. So we can connect on that basis. We don't have to feel that there's something specifically wrong. I don't feel that there's something specifically wrong with me. I feel that there's stuff that perhaps needs my attention and support. And maybe the menopause is actually, every cloud has a silver lining. Maybe it's something that's helping me to look at that and go, actually, these cupboards kind of need cleaning out. Okay, hope that stuff helped. Lots of love.